finally here. You've finally arrived. You've at last found the one place which holds the answers to the questions of the ages. You're excited. Your heart palpitates. Is it real? Can it be true? You're understandably hesitant, yet determinedly hopeful. That is good. Your faith in such matters will be rewarded. You'll not find pat and cliched answers here, no! Here's a place of clarity, of definition, of explanation, of truth. Here combines science and religion, removes tradition and replaces it with fact. Here the universe is holographic, yet tangible, ethereal, yet substantive. Here is a place where time is understood as atemporal. Here there is harmony amidst chaos. Here is where the darkened glass is finally cleared. Here is where you'll find the answers to all the unanswered questions which stretch across the cosmos.
And you are across the cosmos for the next hour. I am Chase Rockwell. I am your host. Last week we talked about the carrot and stick approach. That being Hebrews chapter 6. Can you lose your salvation? And we ascertained after a lengthy discussion that no, you cannot. But if you were to have lost your salvation, exactly where is it you would have gone? And most everyone is aware of the fact that if one were to lose their salvation, we're not certainly going to heaven. No, we would be going to that dreaded place called hell, Hades, Gehenna, Sheol, the pit. And that's what we're going to be talking about this week, is whether or not there is in fact a hell. And if there is, why is there a hell if we have a loving God? And if there is not, why not? And what is it that a Christian should therefore be pursuing his relationship if there is no consequence? So let's get right to it. I'm going to start off this week by playing a clip from R. Douglas Guyvet, Ph.D. He is a professor of theology at Talbot Theological Seminary, which is an adjunct of Biola University in La Mirada, California. He also holds a degree in philosophy. And the reason I'm using Dr. Guyvet's clip is because he holds a view which is pervasive throughout evangelical Christendom. And it does, in my opinion, represent the traditional view of heaven and hell. And I use this only to explain the contrast, or to show the contrast. So without further ado, why don't we play this clip? And then I'm going to get your opinions afterwards. Where he's right, where is he wrong?
This question has two parts. First, why believe there is a hell in the first place? And second, is it just for God to allow a hell to exist? Let's take that first question, why believe there is a hell? To answer that question, we would need somebody with appropriate credentials, somebody that we could trust to tell us the answer to that question. But who in the entire human community would have the experience and the knowledge to tell us authoritatively that there's a hell to avoid? Well, Jesus Christ, who came to give us that message, had those credentials. He alone could tell us with authority, with a kind of credibility that we could trust, that there really is a hell to avoid. But why would he do that? Is an important question. Why would he come and warn us about hell? Well, think of the alternative. Suppose Jesus knew that there was a hell to avoid, and he knew of a way that we could avoid it, but he kept it a secret. He didn't tell us. Well, then he wouldn't be merciful. He wouldn't be compassionate. It is a function of his mercy and his compassion that he has come into the world to show us that there's a hell to avoid, and here's how you do it. Simply believe in me. Well, now that brings up the question, but why does there have to be a hell in the first place? Is it just for God to permit hell? You know, there are a lot of atheists and agnostics in the world today who complain about the evil in the world and the suffering, the pain that we experience. And they want to say a good God would not allow these things to happen. But then they want to say a good God would not allow the existence of a hell either. But how can you have it both ways? Hell is God's way of quarantining all of the evil that exists in the universe today so that there can be a heaven. Without a hell, you couldn't have a heaven, the kind that's described by Jesus in the Bible. So, we believe then that if God is just, hell itself is justified, And if He's merciful, He has to tell us about it and how we can avoid it. Jesus Christ did that, again, with these credentials that no other man has ever had.
So one of the first things that stood out for me from this clip, and you can all give me your opinions, but I found that his understanding of God quarantining all the evil in the universe so there could be a heaven, to be essentially a practice in contrast, that without hell there can be no heaven. It's like without Satan there can be no God. Can God only be visible as a matter of contrast? Can God exist in the absence of evil? Now, for me personally, I look at that, and it appears to me as though the speaker, Dr. Guyvet, doesn't have a handle on exactly what evil is. And that's a personal opinion. Obviously, I look at evil as total selfishness, whereas many other people tend to look at evil as a thing, a condition, an after effect. We would look at committing some sort of a grievous crime or a position of how we treat someone else as evil. Those are symptoms. That's not the cause. And the cause is, in my opinion, total and complete selfishness. The worship of self as opposed to the worship of God. And if you were to look at evil from that perspective, Dr. Guyvet's positioning tends to begin to fall apart. But I want to explore this, get your thoughts on the matter. So let's explore that. What are your thoughts on Dr. Guyvet's position? What do you think he was trying to say? Is this something that you agree is pervasive as traditional teaching within Orthodox Christianity?
Well, again, the word hell, the Anglo-Saxon word hell, had morphed by the time the King James Bible came out from meaning simply an abode of the dead to abode of the dead with Dante's tortures sandwiched in there. So people's concept of hell was one of you die, and if you're evil, you're put into these torturous flames where the, quote, worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched. That's really bad King James vernacular. Okay, it's terrible. And today people think the worm is the soul and that it's an eternal fire. And they use the words of Jesus, as this particular gentleman did, to back up that, hey, the final authority is God himself came down and told us to be afraid of hell. What he failed to understand was Jesus was speaking about Gehenna, and that the very beginning of his ministry, while still under the law, everyone, including Jesus, was under the law of sin and death, the Mosaic law. Jesus came to complete and fulfill and to put away the law. Most people today, and including that gentleman, doesn't understand that the law is a corpse. Christ died under the old covenant and was raised in the new covenant of his blood. So part of that corpse was this particular concept. And what Jesus was teaching the people, that there was a fiery judgment to come. Why would he do that on the Mount of where he's talking about on the Mount of Beatitudes and so forth? Why would he bring this up? Why would he all of a sudden, out of the blue, start talking about this Gehenna, which they all knew referenced where children were burned and where part of Israel was judged? Now, my way of thinking is that Jesus always alluded to the Roman destruction of Israel constantly through his ministry. He knew it was coming. He knew this horrible time was coming upon the Jews. And if you look carefully at what happened, the only textual reference we can find to the Valley of Hinnom that talks about burning bodies in such a way as hell is Josephus makes reference to it in his work. When Vespasian entered Rome in 68 AD, and then Titus, his son, finished off, they killed 1.1 million Jews. And Josephus says the bodies were piled in heaps so tall, they had to be burned outside Jerusalem to keep down the stench and to keep down the disease.
Right, destroy diseases.
They had to destroy them. And they were loaded with maggots. It's not like they grabbed the body and threw it in this inferno. You couldn't keep the fire burning. The way the area was, it wouldn't. How do you keep a fire burning like that? You don't.
Well, burning. You may be certainly smoldering. Sure.
Exactly.
Right.
And so,
if there's enough fuel, it would keep.
And the way they did that, when a Jew fell, they didn't grab the body very carefully, run it off to the valley, and throw it in. No, they piled him in large piles. By the time they got him to the valley, they were ripe. They were loaded with maggots. And that's where the scripture comes in. And Jesus was presenting to them a future judgment that was coming. And I've never seen another theologian grab this, but it's really obvious.
Well, he was talking about the near future with respect to the dissolution of Israel.
It's just
the
like
diaspora.
Well, he gets into it later when he says this temple will be destroyed. He constantly is alluding to the coming destruction of Israel.
So, it seems clear to us, however, when modern theology refuses to accept the secular historical minutiae of former leaders, for example, Constantine for one, but even after the dissolution of the Roman Empire in the middle of the 5th or towards the end of the 5th century, and in its resurrection at the beginning, end of the 9th into the beginning of the 10th century, when the Holy Roman Empire was, and that's where you get all these cathedrals and stuff, because you had these little feudal kingdoms, and you had the one kingdom, and it was I forget the guy's name in Germany. It was and eventually William the Conqueror kind of married it together, but with the Norman conquest. But the Holy Roman Empire sprang out of that, and they wanted the cathedrals. They wanted to build this worldwide edifice, if you will. The hell thing works very well there. But when you have teachers, and that was the reason I pulled out Douglas Guidett, was because he is a respected theologian with degrees. Well, he has a degree in philosophy from Caltech. Now, here's the deal: when you've got a man who's not only done the theological work from a Christian organization, you would expect that there's going to be a certain mindset. But they go to a secular organization and get a degree in philosophy. Philosophy is generally not too kind to fundamentalist Christian ideology. And there's a lot of history that has got to be learned. And if we're seeing it, why aren't they seeing it? Why are they attaching themselves so stridently to a mindset and ignoring everything else?
My personal belief is people are lazy.
Well,
let me
if you're
finish.
Going for a doctorate, I hardly think you can be lazy.
Well, let me finish. Now, on this whole thought, people are lazy in the fact that they will regurgitate whatever the course has required them to learn without necessarily applying it, putting it into practice, or analytically looking at it. When most people are in college classes, their goal is to get through the class.
Well, at lower levels, I would agree with you, but when you're at higher levels, masters, doctorates, I'm having a difficult time believing that. Yeah.
I don't.
Look at some of the other hypocrisies that they bring through, and we start believing it, because it was taught 100 years ago. It was taught 150 years ago. But when you look at it, that's when the whole concept of a certain idea started.
So I'm being naive.
Well, let me share with you why hell exists in current Christian theology. First of all, the word's wrong. That alone should be like a stick of dynamite. But nobody understands this. But here's what happened. Remember when I said that it was contrived by the leadership of the Roman Catholic Church to make hell so horrid, so frightful? And if you read about the tortures of Dante, you get a glimpse of how terrible that is. So they make it so horrible so you'll do anything not to go there. They started to sell indulgences.
Yes.
Get out of hell free cards.
Exactly.
And also they found another way to promote huge sums of money was to sell indulgences to get out of hell, but you can also buy your family members out of hell. And so there was, by today's money sums, billions of dollars raised through the sellings of indulgences. Now
it goes beyond that. They raise an entire army of knights, men that have fought in battle and killed, and they're told, look, you've killed people, you're going to go to hell because you killed somebody, unless you go to the Holy Lands and save the Holy Lands and kill the infidels.
Then you go to heaven.
And then you get to go to heaven because you're killing the bad guys.
On their side, the bad guys were told the same thing.
Every war, but both sides are that way.
Let me share the fracture that everybody kind of picked up and stuck with, not knowing they were believing in false doctrine. When the Reformation came about over a few hundred years, actually, and it culminated in a final authoritative English Bible in which you weren't killed for owning it or using it. They made very few Bibles. Most people were illiterate. So the King James Bible, the authoritative Word of God, went out into our world. Only certain people could actually read the Bible, and they would teach it to their congregations. I had a 1611 King James Bible that was found in America. Must have came over on one of the very early ships, and I can imagine how many pastors used that. But all they knew was what was written in it, and they were told it was the Word of God. They didn't understand the difference between Gehenna or Hades or Sheol. They didn't know those things. It was all translated as one word called hell. So when we broke off from the Catholic Church for various reasons, what we didn't do was analyze the doctrines because we didn't have the wherewithal to do that.
Well, and I don't think that was the salient point.
Well, so the concept of hell, if you look at the Puritan movement and the hell they produced on the people,
it was no different.
It was no different than the Spanish Inquisition. Right. So they utilized this concept of hell very powerfully. And if you follow through both in England and in America, what happened with pastors and what they preach from the pulpit, go to Jonathan Edwards, sinners in the hands of an angry God. And if you look at what he says, scared the hell out of people.
It did.
Well, now let's face it. That particular sermon, it's verified that people were literally clawing at the doors, wanting out. They were so panicked and so afraid of this hell he was speaking. They were in total fear of their life at that moment. They wanted to do anything, give anything to get out of there.
So that concept of hell has motivated people to the cross, motivated people from doing evil. And so people will call it a guardrail, and it's good. But it's a tenet of Christianity that is completely false. There's no truth in it whatsoever. Now, people will listen to these words and say, oh, hope you roast in hell yourself for saying such a thing. No, it's because they don't understand the difference of words or why Jesus used a particular word and why he spoke to the Jews particularly about this particular valley. You have to understand the context, the time, and what was going on. And Rome was about to invade.
And to who he was speaking to. It's very
it's
important.
Just like people today go off into the Zionistic movement and they read Matthew 24. They read Luke 22. And they tie it in with Revelation because their pastors tell them to do this, and all the books out there say it. But when Jesus was talking about the temple and that it would be destroyed, and he says, when you see these certain signs, blood red moon. It's real simple. When Rome burned, the whole moon was blood red.
Yeah, because of the soot.
Oh my gosh. Right. When you see the stars falling from the sky, people are looking for actual stars. No. When Rome conquered a particular city, they shot so many flaming arrows that it looked like the sky was filled with falling stars.
The question that is begged here is that, did Christ know that he was speaking figuratively? Did he do so deliberately? Was it to confuse us?
Nope.
Why couldn't he have been clear? Why couldn't he have said, well, yes and no. If he was clear, that would make our present conversation a moot point because they wouldn't be having this conversation. So if we're talking, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but I do want to clarify that when we start getting into whether or not Christ was being figurative or he was being literal, there's this wide argument. Most people look at Bible literalists as loons, as kooks, because they also don't understand. Well, yeah, but why? Because there's this incongruity that is obvious from the opening passage of Genesis to the closing pages of Revelation.
It's not that difficult.
Well, says you.
Well,
okay.
No, it's
there
not.
A
It's
multitude of people out there that,
Well,
struggle with it on a continual basis, and I count myself amongst them.
Christ was speaking to his audience.
Yes.
And that is the one thing we blatantly fail to always remember. He is talking to a first century simple group of people.
I get that.
And he is using what they can see, what they can smell, what they can taste, what they can touch as examples. And that's he's referring to things that they already know and understand. And saying, this is what it's going to be like. This is what it's going to happen.
So is there a historical precedent with respect to flaming arrows being regarded as looking as stars from the heavens?
I would say if you look at Roman writings, yeah. Very much so. You go to the movie Gladiator, and you can see exactly there. They've tried to follow the type of weaponry and so forth that Rome used when they invaded.
No, I wholeheartedly agree.
Even before that, we can go back to Leonidas holding the Persians at the pass with the 300 Spartans. And it is historical fact that Leonidas was told, our arrows will blot out the sun. And the reply was, we will fight in the shade.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
so
their arrows bounced off of them because they were tanks.
Which was a hallmark of Roman, Grecian, Phoenician writing.
Well, arrows were artillery. They were first century artillery.
So all Christ is doing here is just borrowing from this well-known poetic prose.
Well,
that is my opinion.
Let's sidetrack just for a minute so we can better understand what's happening. Let's understand what Jesus was saying. Why would he say it's better to enter into life maimed, having one eye or one arm or one leg, than to have a full body and be cast into the flames of Gehenna? Why would anybody translate that into an eternal hell? First of all, the body is not eternal. It's corporeal.
Everybody pretty much is aware
It burns
of
up very quickly. So what we have to do is borrow from early Catholic theology, which is really funny. I'm sorry it is. But what they would say in their tortures is that you'd be stripped or filleted alive or eaten alive by demons. And then at night your body would miraculously repair, only to be stripped, filleted alive, eaten, hung by your tongues, beaten the next day.
You're talking about when they're in the actual state of hell.
In hell,
Okay, I've heard that.
Or you will burn in utter torment. In other words, God will create a type of body that feels pain, that will damage, but won't go away, and you'll be in this frothy, hellish mix of burning, and you're doing nothing but screaming 24/7.
Yeah.
Okay, and demons are shoveling you in there, and it's so ludicrous, it's stupid.
Well, no, the first thought that came to my mind, even when I was young, and I remember reading about this, is that how do you get the job as one of the demons? Because it seems like easier work.
Well, yeah,
exactly.
I mean, let's be honest.
Right.
Would you rather be the one being beaten to death or the one that's doing the beating?
Well,
if
also,
that's your condition.
They show demons as these gnarled up, weird-looking creatures that are spider-like. They've got all kinds of...
Who cares?
Well, they draw any type of idea that would bring fear into people.
All right,
That's
so we've
their
got
point.
this image of hell. Now, my question again is, we're dealing with, and this is just, Douglas Guyvet is just one.
I know.
There is a multitude of these people with advanced degrees, and when you've got that advanced degree, typically you've got this gentleman as well. He's got a degree in philosophy. I've taken philosophy courses. I know that you delve into a lot of history. So my question again is, what the hell? What are we doing? What is going on that we are so easily buying into this fraud? And you know, I'm going to liken it to something else, and it is when we're following a political ideology. Why do we believe that socialism or communism is so much greater than the absolute freedom you're going to find under, say, for example, market economy? what is deluding these people? Is it that we have a level of self-loathing that we feel we deserve an eternal punishment?
Well,
so we'll buy into it that easily?
Well, everyone knows there's a sense of justice, and everyone believes in their heart there's a sense of justice, and that God is the ultimate judge, and he will judge righteously. We all believe that. We all know that a man like Adolf Hitler, for what he did, or Pol Pot, or some other of these terrible people, Stalin in history, that killed millions, and there are lesser and greater degrees. We all know they deserve to be punished in a very harsh way. So we will confirm that, hell must exist to take care of people like that. Where we really have problems is all of a sudden we realize, by this man's own confession, that you have to follow an exacting set of rules and regulations inside your heart, not just outside. You can't just mouth them in order to escape the flames of hell. And you know what? No one really knows until it happens. So we go to the grave, including atheists and agnostics, atheists too, with the slightest notion that there could be a hell as they're dying. Even though they totally reject there's a God, they believe they're fully, upward causation, they're a cause of biology that was evolved. They still have this notion, tiny as it is, that maybe there is a God, and if there is, guess what? I'm going to hell.
Well, and Christians suffer the same lament, and that is a lot of them have this last-minute feeling that maybe I wasn't good enough, and I'm going to wind up in hell.
I remember Mom, the day before she died, we were talking. I didn't know she'd die the next day, but I looked at her and I said, "Well, are you ready to go?" And she goes, "Yeah." I said, "Are you afraid?" She goes, "Yeah." She goes, "What if I'm not going to heaven?" And I remember that all those years of her believing. But then you look at all the things you do, the words you say that are wrong.
Not only that, but her formative teaching was in the Catholic Church, and so that's going to play a role. It's very difficult to unclasp what you learned when you were a little child.
Well, there's more to it than that. I mean, it's easy for you to believe something until you're at that point where the meat is meeting the metal. You can believe that God is going to send you money because you're begging God for money.
Yeah,
and you believe
that ain't going to happen.
And you can believe that someone's going to mail it to you until you go out to your mailbox and open it up and it's empty. Or there's a bill there. So until you get to that point where you're actually you're facing the thing, whatever you're believing.
I understand that. I guess my question at this juncture simply is this: why is it that we are so quick as a people to believe in something so ludicrous?
It's the unknown, and it's been positioned in such a way that there's no way around it. Nobody has authority over their life when they die, and they know it. They're totally out of control. It can be a Bill Gates, or it can be a bum on the street.
Yes, death is a great equalizer.
It equalizes everybody. You realize everything is out of your control, and at that moment in time, all the what-if scenarios race through your mind. And then you realize you're totally prone to whatever's coming. And so there's great fear and there's great dread. Some people are smug about it and say, well, I know I'm going to heaven. And other people say, well, I don't believe in it at all. But in the mind, in the back, there's always this what if. If you go to the beginning of the Bible, you can see that the Jews didn't believe in that type of torturous hell. And here's why. Cain kills Abel. Absolutely no words are given about a torturous hell whatsoever.
No, there is none.
There's nothing. The only thing that happens is he's given a mark not to be cruel to him, but so that other people won't kill him and take revenge on him, which is always kind of weird from my perspective because there was supposedly no other people around in those days. And yet,
but now you're getting into a whole.
That's a whole.
That's a subject we'll get onto later. But it was kind of funny to me that they would do that, and I've seen pastors, grab their neck and go, "Well, gulp." What that means is that someday they'd grow up and there'd be more people, and then they'd go after them.
Yeah,
but
nobody's buying it.
Anyway, but my point is that if you go to the early chapters of our history, in the Bible. There's no indication of a burning hell anywhere. We only get that when we look backwards through the New Testament lens and we try and force fit things like Jesus with the rich man and Lazarus. We go, aha.
There's some allusions to a worse existence in, for example, when I read in Job. And I'm not going to delve into that because it takes us way off point. But I really do think that as we need to explore, I feel, why human beings are so quick to buy into this. You said that everybody has this little niggling thought as they approach their demise, if they're conscious, I suppose. If you're in a coma, you're not going to think of it. There was a gentleman executed last year for horrific murder. Killed a person, then he killed 2 more people while he was in prison, so that the prison would execute him. He didn't want it. He was given a life sentence. He didn't want to live in prison. He said, "I'm just going to keep killing him until you execute me." So they did. And on his final words, he chose the electric chair. And his final words were spoken in Gaelic because he's of Irish descent. And his final words were, "Kiss my ass." Mm-hmm. So it didn't seem like he was too bugged.
No.
There's this old saying, I would rather what was it? Rule in hell than serve in heaven.
Serve on your knees in heaven.
And there are a lot of people that think that because the image that we've been given of God is that we're going to be little more than just, I don't know, heavenly doorstops.
Well, let's face it.
We got to sit around on a cloud all day at his foot and sing songs to him. And what the hell kind of an existence is that?
Bow down and yell, "Oh, how great thou art!"
Yeah, I mean, after a while.
And the whole time we've been waiting for him to strike us while we were walking around in the flesh with lightning bolts. So.
This is something we definitely need to talk about in a future podcast because what's in store for us is something far greater than we can imagine. It has nothing to do with the bowing down of the knees and so forth. That's not what's in store for us.
But that's what's been sold. And just as though hell has been sold as this really heavy stick with nails and glass sticking out of it, and you keep getting beaten by it, the carrot is no less infantile, I suppose.
True. I would say that most people believe in God out of a have to. They have
there's no doubt about that. The present structure is love me at a point of a gun. But you love me, or I pull the trigger, and I'm going to, like Clint Eastwood said, blow your head clean off.
Right.
Well, here again, part of that is what started me on the trek that I'm on to this day.
What, Clint Eastwood?
Close. But when you started looking at God as a being that says, "Serve me, or I'm going to destroy you."
Well, you don't have to look at it. That's how it's presented.
That is how it's presented.
Me, or I will kill your ass.
Exactly. And when I started looking at that, I said, I want nothing to do with such a being. And if being cast in hell is the option, I don't see a difference. Because if this God is so great that he's saying, "I'm so great, I'm so pure, I love you so much, if you don't love me, I'm going to destroy you."
Yeah, that's like a psycho boyfriend or girlfriend or something.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking stalker mode.
Well, that's the fracture in theological understanding we get when we look at the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, the Father of Jesus or Yahweh. And people want to merge them together as one, and you get this chaotic image. And then what they do is they have to use what's called dispensational understanding to graft the two together, meaning that under the blood of Jesus Christ, we're loved and adored. Without the blood of Jesus Christ, we're to be brutally destroyed.
Well, we're hated because God only will tolerate us through this veil of blood, this lens, this,
Paul
this
was,
filter. Yeah.
Paul was an intelligent man that was steeped in Judaism. There's no question he learned a lot from the Spirit. But there's also no question that he didn't know a lot. And people today will take offense to that, but it's true. He was a human being. And in this dissertation to Romans, he comes up with something that's quite phenomenal, but typical. And that is, he states that when people have argument with the concept of God, he says, what right does the pot have to say to the potter? Why did you make me like this? And then he proposes an idea. What if God, although willing to endure with much patience vessels of wrath prepared beforehand for destruction, did so for the purpose of lavishing his love on vessels of mercy prepared beforehand for eternity? And so we look at that as what's called truth. We always look at what's written and we memorize it as true. Well, this is the way it is. It's God's Word. Because we are taught sola scriptura, which is a Catholic philosophy. And we were taught that so that we wouldn't deviate from it as a truth. So when we come across Paul's dissertation in Romans, people actually believe that's God speaking to them. But really, Paul was posing an argument with the best logic he could. He didn't really know. But we take it as a fact. So,
not so much as a fact. I've always taken it as though Paul had insight that is beyond mine.
Well, let me show you where Paul was wrong. I'm sorry, listeners, but let me show you real clearly. There's a wonderful verse we all memorize, and we see it at football games.
John 3:16.
For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to judge the world, for the world was already judged. He sent him to save it. Okay, so we look at that and we think, wait a second.
Okay, but can we just finish it? Because the last line in that little passage there is, whoever believes in him is not condemned.
Right.
Well, that trips a lot of people up.
Well, it keeps going. There's still, because those that do not believe were condemned already. It's already an over and done with deal.
I get that, and that's where we get the hyper-Calvinistic.
It is.
What
and
has
that
to be
hurts a lot of people.
Well, what has to be comprehended when reading any of the New Testament is time. Understanding the concept of time.
That they're still under the law here.
In John chapter 3, he was speaking to Nicodemus, one of the leaders of Israel. Jesus had not yet died and rose again. He was still under the law. Everything he spoke was to fulfill and then complete the law. And people don't understand that concept. They read John 3:16 as if it's like open. There's no expiration date.
Because Jesus is speaking it, and we give a certain level of authority to Jesus.
So we don't comprehend what's really going on. But if you look very carefully, it said, for God so loved the world. Now, how could he so love the world if the world was not yet under the blood of Christ? We're taught that the soulish man is at enmity with God. We are taught that the natural man is an enemy of God. We're taught that he hates sin, that he will destroy sin, that all our righteousness is as dirty rags. So therefore, when you take all those Bible scriptures and you pile them up like coins on the left side over here, and you realize that he sent Jesus because he loved us, makes no sense.
Well, yeah, there's some cognitive dissonance going on there. There's no doubt about that. But one could take the position that, yeah, he's kind of exasperated with us. He's kind of irritated with us. He'd rather us kind of go a different road. But despite his absolute, utter loathing, he still loved us enough to give us one last out.
That's crap.
Well,
very much so, but
it may be crap, but that's what's being taught, and that's the prevailing mindset.
Let me share.
Because when people get into this situation, what else are you going to do?
Well,
there's times you have your kids, you want to kill your kid, just strangle them because they've done something, but you don't kill them. You love them, and well, some of them do, I suppose.
Well, yeah.
The creator of all physics, all science as we know it, the creator of all that exists.
I'm playing devil's advocate.
He has meltdowns and gets pissed off.
Do you want me to read some passages here?
If we go to the Old Testament, he definitely does.
Well, I take tremendous offense to that because it, number one, is impossible. God cannot get exasperated as a human being does. It is impossible. He that creates quantum collapse and knows the end of all things doesn't get pissed off at humans. An angel does.
Very much so, because they don't
but
know what's
if you
coming.
want to go there, then you have to explain why we are painting such a disparity between the God of the Old Testament and Jesus Christ,
Because
which we've yet to really
of
cover
ignorance. It's total ignorance. Again, it's the sandwiching of the Old Testament in front of the New Testament in order to give a history, and a misunderstanding when the book was translated. But we'll get into that later. But I want to share something with you right now, and that is that God Himself, which is a terrible name, by the way. It's inert.
Well, it's not a name; it's a designation.
It's a designation.
Right.
It's kind of a dumb one at that, because it's very limited. But that's why Jesus said we're to call Him Father. Now,
Well, he was even beyond that. We were to call Him Daddy.
Now,
There's
this
the
is what
relationship
you would
he
call the
explained for us.
salient point. Jesus told us to call Him Father prior to His death, burial, and resurrection. So in other words, what He was saying is there's a grafting of a family from His part to us prior to the blood of Jesus covering our sins. That's an impossibility according to modern theology.
Well, no, as I've said,
There's
because
no
it was
way around
Christ, they impute much on Him by His mere presence, and not so much on His actions.
So
the
he-
actions could be atemporal, if you will, because it's Christ.
No, He had not yet died, and for the sins of mankind, He had not yet
And how many
shed
times
His
have
blood.
you gone? No, how many times have you gone to church or listened to any sermon and had the pastor or the speaker put things in a chronological context? Because I haven't.
I can't say I've ever had that.
That's
happen.
because
No
they don't
one
know.
gives a dead rat's ass about chronological context.
what is
because
a
they
dead
don't
rat's
understand
ass?
it and they don't think it's important. When
And why don't they think it's important? Because they take presumptions with who Christ is, and they just paint with a
You
broad
answered
brush.
an earlier question. You said, how could a person going to a seminary and also taking a secular course...
Yeah, because generally the two seem to be at odds with one
Well,
another.
no, you're showing the ignorance of humanity. And
Well,
the
okay.
ignorance of current theology and in past theology is amazing. Very few people understand chronological order. They have what's called a foundation in which little Johnny grows up, and one way or another he comes to know God, comes to know Jesus, and one way or another he gets the calling to become a pastor or teacher or something. And little Johnny goes and takes all the right courses. Well, he's already predisposed to what he's supposed to know. He's taught in a way without him thinking about it. So chronological order doesn't occur to him. So little Johnny goes through all his seminary courses. Then he goes even to Cal Berkeley and learns a philosophy course, or wherever else you want to go. Learns from the best minds in the world. Still, he doesn't understand what's going on. To assume that these people know what's going on, that's ridiculous.
I assume because I'm taking them at their word. I'm taking it at face value. There's a lot of different philosophical disciplines. There's a lot of philosophers that I don't much agree with. There's a lot of philosophers that actually had some pretty good things to say and some interesting perspectives. I developed kind of my own philosophy over the years, which I don't think is as man-centered as I find a lot of philosophers from the ancients all the way up to today.
Mm-hmm.
And most philosophy that I have read tends to be extraordinarily humanistic.
Well, we're humans, so...
Even if it's coming from the mouth of a supposed theologian.
Yeah.
And that is maddening to me.
Why? Philosophy means the love of knowledge, so it's just simply the accumulation of knowledge and using your mind in conjunction.
Why do you limit the knowledge to the temporal? Shouldn't philosophy expand beyond the temporal?
It should, but philosophers are notoriously closed boxes. They're closed systems.
Well, and that was my conclusion.
They don't know they are, and that's
Well,
okay.
they will flat out deny
They will
are.
deny it. They will
Yeah.
deny it.
They will fight you tooth and nail.
Well, it's just like, for
knives will come
instance, you take any discipline of science. Take a biologist or a microbiologist. They're terrible with quantum physics. Why? Because
they're biologists.
They're biologists, and if they learned about quantum physics and understood the principles involved, they realized that biology has very little to do with evolution, and that they can't deal with. When you understand how it works,
No, I
the same thing with philosophers. They have their agenda, and they work
There's no
within
doubt
their
about
agenda.
that.
And that's all they do. And their box is limited to their agenda. They don't understand that.
so
they're like
are we not
a
in the
Democrat.
same situation here? Okay, because we've got a particular agenda. My agenda is that the boxes that we were all raised in be torn apart, be broken.
It's hard to
Because
do. Yeah.
It is hard to do, and I know that there's a number of people who would disagree with some of the positions we've taken, but the whole point of this podcast is to maybe point out some of the limitations of these prevailing thought processes or ideologies. It goes beyond is the God of the Old Testament an angel or was it God Almighty? The reason I brought up Douglas Guyvett was because he had a degree in philosophy. And that to me is important because I'm seeing the marriage of two almost, I would say, opposing thoughts. And it seems as though his theology won out over his philosophy. But even if he didn't, even if your assertion that philosophy, even today, is as closed a box as is Christian theology, for example, then we've got a larger problem, which is no one can look outside. We can't look fourth or fifth or sixth dimensionally.
Well,
Why can't we?
Early philosophers were more true to the standard of what the actual word was, which simply meant the love of knowledge. We've isolated today and brought it into a psychology setting in which theology is looked at as kind of like an old, anchor that holds us into a position. But the early philosophers understood science to the best that they could at their time, but they considered all aspects of the material world as well as the inner spiritual world. So a philosopher wasn't just as stunted as they are today. Today they're extremely stunted. They teach very stunted philosophy in colleges.
You're building off of the foundations of Kant and Nietzsche, and to delve into the spiritual is to almost concede that the thing you loathe the most, which is this ultimate creator,
right,
does in fact exist. You've got to build your philosophical foundation on humanity.
Yeah.
And that's where I find the, well, and not only do I find it maddening, but that's where I find the insincerity of their position really breaks through. One of the questions that I ask some of these folks when I do have an opportunity to talk to them is, how do you approach, for example, an organization like SETI, which is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, if the intelligence they find may not be corporeal? What if the intelligence they find is pure energy? How do you quantify that if all you're doing is you're looking and basing everything you know on the corporeal? What if you find an intelligence that is atemporal, which doesn't even exist necessarily except at their own will or whim within our dimensional sphere? How do you quantify that? Because everything you have written, everything you have pursued, every foundation you have constructed and built your philosophy on is only limited to a very, very small slice of creation. So you are completely lost.
They have to be in order to shut out the concepts of theology.
Then why fund SETI?
Well,
why fund NASA?
Philosophers don't fund SETI.
They do insofar as that they have built an idea that what we're looking for out there is not what I just described.
Let me share
We're looking for another corporeal being that's maybe a higher advance than we are, but not over the top.
Let me share a simple concept that Gene Roddenberry projected into his Star Trek series, in which you would take the most diehard atheist would accept the concept of God. What the diehard atheist or the philosopher of today's age rejects is the God that's shown in the Bible. or the God that's shown in the Quran, or the God that's shown in these other theological books.
The God in the Quran was Star Trek V.
Right, but that's true. But anyway, but if a being was to be found through the SETI project and was to show powers and abilities far beyond our comprehension even, and then say that I'm the one who wrote the scripture, everyone would believe it. They're looking for a scientific explanation as to what God is. Then they'd believe it. Everyone would. They'd say, oh, it's just an advanced being. Ancient aliens and so forth have gone down that track, and they believe that planet Earth was seeded by another race.
Yeah, panspermia. But even there, they're still dealing with this small little slice of creation.
Right.
Where's the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 20th dimensional understanding? I mean, if it pencils out mathematically, and it does,
That it does.
why can't we understand that far beyond there being mathematical equations which delve, I think it's up to 46 different dimensions, that there may be entities or an entity that exists even beyond that? Why are we so arrogant as a human animal to limit ourselves? Why must we anthropomorphize every friggin' thing that comes across? Are we that scared as an individual?
We're that stupid.
No, is it stupidity or is it fear? Because we fear the unknown. So if we can distill things down to what we can know.
What was it? His name, Neil
deGrasse Tyson?
Yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
What about him?
He had a very interesting comment.
Which one?
There are many. Very intelligent man. But one of the things he made reference to was they were talking about that apes are nearly 1% different, or 99% compatible to a human being, close. And so the idea we glean from that is that, we descended from apes, or apes descended, whatever. And so he says, do you realize what that 1% does? It builds everything you've seen on the planet Earth. That 1% difference has created technologies that boggle the mind. It's taken us to the moon. It'll probably take us to Mars. It's created the internet. That little 1%. So he's saying, what if?
As an aside, I just have to put this out there, that Mars is the only planet in our solar system ruled and populated solely by robots.
This is true.
Well, anyway, he's saying that if we were to meet another group of beings that were just 1% more intelligent than we are, look at the difference it would be. Do you see what I'm saying?
I see exactly what you're saying. That's why I don't understand why these philosophers and these other scientists continually reject the notion.
Your idea of mathematics.
They operate on if I can't see it, it doesn't exist.
But that's stupid.
It is. Stupid
Ergo
is as
my
stupid
point.
does.
Ergo my point.
It's like mathematics, for instance. We assume that from the best of our ability, from the brightest minds within our human gene pool, we've accomplished thus. But what they don't see is that there could be beings that have a higher form of mathematics that is so far above ours. Do you see what I'm saying? It's not like math is the answer to everything. It's simply our ability to conceptualize and create.
Yeah, it's a language that is transcendent.
And it's based on our senses. It really is. So,
but my point was in utilizing mathematics is because I know that in mathematics, in order to solve various problems, a lot of them in quantum physics, they have identified, and I'll have to look. I should just look this up. I believe it's 46
and that's
different dimensions.
That's from our handicap.
Well, and
of
I
the
realize
human being.
that there's probably mathematicians out there, if they haven't already started laughing their asses off or smacking their heads. I get that the utilization of mathematics in defining these particular dimensional planes of existence are done to satisfy a particular equation or problem.
Yeah.
I get that, but
Right.
what my point is that if it's utilized in any form, shape, matter at all, then the door has to be cracked open at least a little bit for the allowance that there are higher dimensional planes by which something sentient can exist.
Right. Quantum physics demands, when you understand it and you understand math, quantum physics demands there could be an unlimited number of types of beings on this planet that we can't even communicate or see.
All right.
Communicate with or see.
And
they could be occupying the same space.
And I read the same stuff. So why is it if we call them an angel?
Right.
Right.
You don't know your ass from a hole in the ground. But if we call it an ET,
there is
my goodness,
an
yes, of course.
extreme prejudice towards
What is
theological
this,
thought.
language?
Well, I mean, let's go on beyond even entities. Right now, they're searching for micro wormholes and micro black holes
yeah.
throughout the world because they believe that they exist in a plane on this earth
They can exist anywhere.
that are so small we can't find them, but they're there. But at the same time, if we start talking about an entity that exists in a plane that we do not see, smell, hear, taste, touch, or understand, it can't be here.
The Tunguska explosion in 1908 in Russia up in Siberia
Yes.
has often been thought as being a small little black hole that passed through our Earth.
Yeah, or a giant meteor that blew up over the top of Earth and went
that's
off
what
like
I
an
think.
atomic bomb with an aerial burst.
But tying this back into hell, as we go off into the scientific wonders, is that it doesn't work out at all for any reason. If you take a look at the nature of God, it doesn't work. It makes no sense to dig up a corpse or to take a spirit and endow them with a indestructible body of some sort for the sole purpose of enduring sheer terror and pain through all eternity.
What if we deserve it?
You don't deserve it. That's stupid.
But what
Okay,
if we
so
do?
we were created
He
for
for-
the purpose of
No, he
torment.
It's
Here's two little fallacies. Now, I think they need to be explored before we go further. And one is, okay, we've got this freedom of will.
Right.
So without free will, are we really free? And this is how I look at free will. Within a very narrow, and I mean extraordinarily narrow walkway, I have some free will. Okay? On a much broader or macro scale, I have zero. I did not choose when I was to be born. I did not choose what sex I was to be born, what ethnicity I was to be born.
Is that why you're struggling?
That's a lot of it. How I would look, the family that I would be born into, where geographically I would be born. There's a
Financially.
number of factors that I had no control over. I was given, the cards you play, as the old saying goes, or the hand you play. You play the hand you're dealt, rather. I screwed that one up. But there's a lot of profundity in that because we like to say that we've got all this free will. Really? Do we have that much free will? And even within that narrow sphere, we've got other people always
Telling you what your
trampling
choice is?
on what free will we've got. How much free will do you have if you're a peasant over in North Korea right now? Not a whole hell of a
From a
lot.
theological standpoint, they're just saying we have free will to do right or wrong, choose good or evil. And we may not be able to choose how we look, where we live, or any of those other physical positions in life, but we can choose to bless somebody or curse them. We can choose to look at something or to put it away. We can choose to shoot someone or not shoot someone. Those are the type of tangible realities that would be incorporated into the word of free will.
And so by doing that, we can eternally piss God off or eternally find favor with him.
No, they don't. You have to understand hell. I have to make this very clear. To understand the concept of hell, you have to understand who our Father is. That's first. Then you can understand what hell, Gehenna, and Sheol is. You have to understand him first. And people go about it backwards. They look at the punishments, they look at the fear, they look at the worry, and they focus on that because they don't know their Father in heaven. And that's the big difference.
They don't even dare call him Father.
Yeah.
You know, they will say, our Father, but they're not relating it to the pathway that Jesus had set it up for. As I brought out earlier, he was explaining an intimate relationship. The word he used in the Greek, that we've translated from the Greek, was Abba, which the closest thing we have to that is daddy. He's describing such an intimate relationship that you could crawl into the lap of God and say, this is broken, fix it. You know, and just like a father with a 3-year-old child would do what he could to comfort the child in whatever's going on. And that is the relationship Christ describes that we are to have with God. But the majority of the people out there have this, I keep going back to, they have a Zeus idea of God. And where gods are evil, wicked, petty, cruel, and they're just waiting for you to screw up so they can blast you.
Or, like Hercules, you have to prove your value and your worth to earn sonship. It's something of... that's why in different cultures they will walk miles on their knees. They'll make difficulties in order, or they'll whip themselves.
There are people today crucifying themselves in an effort to be more like Christ. Christ didn't ask you to crawl up on a cross and hang from that. That's only going to get you physical pain. He was not even closely mentioning that. His view of us is far different and far greater than what we prescribe to ourselves.
And with that, we'll conclude this week's episode of Across the Cosmos. Join us next week for part 2 of this interesting and enlightening discussion on hell. Does it exist? Where did the concept of hell come from? Why do we as a people so easily embrace such a concept? Why do we think a God, who is so vast, could also be so limited in vision as to create a being solely for the purpose of an eternal torment? Well, those questions and much more will be addressed in the next episode, so do not miss it. For Lou Rogers, Mark Wilson, and Dave Cameron, I am Chase Rockwell, your host, and we'll see you next time you find yourself across the cosmos.
Send any questions or comments to us via email at info@acrossthecosmos.com. Also, visit us at the web at www.acrossthecosmos.com for show updates, news, and information. No part of this podcast may be used without express written permission from the staff of Across the Cosmos. Across the Cosmos is a production of Omite Corporation, copyright 2015.